This is station number 1, and with this station I wanted to really create a very powerful message. And first of all, what I wanted to do was have the institution of the Roman Empire extremely auspiciously described by these huge steps, these huge Corinthian pillars that show intimidation, show respect, show the institution. And here Christ is almost at the steps, but he's not on the steps. I played around with having him sitting on them, but I thought the best is to have a little bit of a separation. Pontius Pilate, unlike other depictions I've created of him, as well as other sculptors, he's considered not like an evil demon, but more like a pensive philosopher here. And he looks extremely deep in thought. This is the person that said, "What is truth?" And I wanted to kind of give him a little bit more sympathy than how most times I've seen him depicted. Christ, on the other hand, is very stoically looking, gazing. Everything about his pose is extremely quiet. I wanted him just to be simple. I didn't want any over-the-top movement or gestures. His hands are falling to his feet. There's this face-to-face dialogue going on. It's an extremely, extremely intense piece. This part is so powerful that at one point along the creative process, I thought not even of having the Christ figure, just the Pontius Pilate and the steps. I think it's very effective. It brings you into a world. I love the scale of the pieces. I love the detail in the Corinthian columns and the detail of Pontius Pilate. But I think most of what I love about it is the two faces. Christ's face is very softly done. He looks like he's deep in thought, but he looks at peace with himself. Everything about him. Pontius Pilate, he looks almost like Rodin's The Thinker. There's a little bit of torture in the tenseness of his pose, as you can see. His legs are together. He's not really enjoying this. He looks like it's a real struggle for him what to do here. And everything by his woven fingers, his knees close together, and his whole posture shows this angst, this pensiveness that I really think is true to Pontius Pilate himself. And I think that this piece here is the great starting point for the Stations of the Cross. When you see this, you know you're not going to see a decoration. You know you're in for an artistic and spiritual experience. This piece here is a depiction of Christ falling. Now, this was a piece that was the second last to do on the series because I was unsatisfied how the first one of this piece was working on. Simply it was too small. The figure of Christ was about this big, his head was about that big, and with that small scale I didn't have the room to do the intensity that I wanted to. So again, like several of these Stations of the Cross on this series, we're cutting to the chase. We're going to the intensity, we're going to the power, we're going to the most important things. And this piece here is a blow-up, it's a close-up, it's a slice of life, of the pain and suffering of Christ falling for the second time. Now, it shows the agony of his face. This piece here, when people come to view it, they will have a life-size face that they can relate to. The coldness, the cleanness of this concrete or stone and the softness and the crushing of Christ's face really makes this a very, very powerful piece. When I was doing it, I was almost feeling like wincing as I was doing the cheek crushing to the ground. The piece also, although it's hyper realistic, there's certain aspects of it that are extremely abstract. It's almost like a wedge here. And that wedge, basically what that does is it shows a thrusted aspect of it. I'm not dealing with the shoes, I'm not dealing with the hands, I'm dealing with what's of essential importance on this piece, and that is the expressions of Christ here. worked within the whole concept, it's very, very powerful. I'm providing windows into realities that people can come into. And part of the role of an artist is to control how people view these pieces. This one is probably one of the more intense of the series. Station number 2, Jesus takes up, bears his cross. This piece here was very, very challenging. Like all of my pieces on this set, I want them truly to be original, truly to be enlightening for the viewer that comes across the piece. What looks at the front is a simple 3 figures, 2 grabbing grabbing Christ's arms. The figures are sculpted anonymously. They're not represented with excessive evil, sinister looks on their face. They're not expressed as any specific groups of people, not Romans, not Jews, just human forms. And I wanted to have them universal, in a sense, to represent the universal humanity. Christ, you can see, is very, very stoic in his acceptance, it seems. His face is up, his hands are spread out, almost like he's praying. There's a sense of resignation to him. You can see the fire of the cross that forms the base as well was something, after a while on the project, I came to evolve into. Initially it was a very stiff cross, animating it with the striations, worked in with the base, brings the cross into the realm of more symbolic rather than an actual wooden cross. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create an arena where people can actually have an imagination. The piece is presuming that the viewer has some sophistication to begin with. Now, there it is. Jesus takes up his cross. On the back, instead of leaving it empty, on this one I made it truly a 3-dimensional piece by having more figures, almost as if they're raising a flag. They're heaving and pushing this cross, pressing Christ onto the cross. The effect of this is not only to make it more interesting piece with more figures, more dynamic, but what it also shows is the intensity of the actual moment where Christ is having this cross merge within his body here. I think the piece is very, very creative, and I think it's also very, very traditional in the sense that the anatomy is all very, very realistically done within a very, very modern concept. The focal point, of course, is the front, the expressions of Christ, the figures. It's a beautiful small piece to accompany the set. This Station of the Cross, Jesus Falls, this piece here is a very, very powerful piece. Initially, when I sculpted it, I didn't have the cross on. I just sculpted this figure, which looked like it's been smothered by extreme weight. There's everything that speaks of exhaustiveness here, everything that speaks of absolute fatigue and pain in this piece, almost a point of resignation. That's why I believe that this piece here should be Jesus Falls for the 3rd time. I wanted to have a sequential point of misery to the piece and pain to the piece. And you can see here, although the figure is basically on the ground, the anatomy is all there. I had my model for hours upon hours pose in this actual position. Of course, I didn't put on my model the cross, but this cross will be cast in bronze, and it will be welded onto the piece to reinforce the smothering, the oppressiveness that Christ felt. This one is from my years of working on different stations across. I believe that this is a very, very powerful piece because it shows the deepest strain, the deepest exhaustedness that I could possibly depict in a figure. Although the figure is low on the ground, it is very, very realistic. There is no necessarily front to this view. From any angle it will look nice. The bronze cast will make it easier to hold this cross on, to weld it up there. This is just pre-casting period though. But it was a very good piece, and this is one of the most difficult things to do when you're working on a set of stations of the cross. is how to depict Jesus falling for 3 times and still creating some interest in a piece. Well, I've achieved that in this set by sequentially showing more pain, more exhaustion, and more emotion consequently throughout each of these pieces here. This piece is nice, it fits within it, it's not too large, it's not one of the smaller ones, but I think it's one of the most emotionally powerful ones of the set. Station 14, Jesus laid in the tomb. This one here, I wanted to do something that would show detail, anatomy, and emotion in a dignified way. What I wanted to also do is show realism in a sense. This piece here, Christ is dead. There's no doubt about it. He's not sleeping. His body is twisted in a way that only a corpse would probably be in. But the emotion is really captured within the hands. One hand is on the ground, or limp, almost touching the ground, and the other hand is wound up by the embrace of Mary. The idea of putting Mary on the piece was one of the later evolutions of the sculpture. Initially, I only had these 2 cloaked figures here showing very much mystery and solemnness. By adding the 3rd and center figure here, the framework shows the relationship between the mother and the son in a very, very, very touching way. There's only 2 faces in this that are very much visible from the viewer, and that's the face of Christ and the face of Mary. Mary is very much broken by the whole experience. There's still that relationship going on. The model that I used, hold the pose of the Christ for hours to get the anatomy as perfect as possible. In a small sculpture like this, it's nice to have the figures at this size very, very detailed. You can see the striations of the robes, the rib cage of the Christ figure. It's a very, very approachable piece. In this scale, people really feel that they can walk up and really investigate the piece. And so I believe that's what's going to make this one very, very much successful. The tomb, the composition from a distance looks beautiful. And there is drama within this piece. It's telling a story not only of Christ being laid in the tomb, but also the story of Christ's mother and that relationship. The piece is meant to be seen by the front, unlike the other pieces. The back here is very, very simple, but still yet there's a lot of detail put in it just in case someone has to turn around. Right here from the back, it does look very mysterious, but truly by walking around the whole thing will the viewer benefit more than not on the piece here. And you can see the Christ figure's face, the expression, the matted down hair. It's very, very powerful. And also, the curious viewer can also benefit from looking in there and seeing the different expressions of grief that's on the 2 figures laying the actual body in the tomb. This piece was a delight to do, and I was very much influenced by the Renaissance masters creating it, thinking of some of the beautiful etchings from the great masters of the Italians. When you're doing Christ falling 3 times in a sculpture, there is no other alternative but to give it everything you possibly can. To make what might be redundant in the sculptures of the Station of the Cross be one of the best things. This is Christ falls for the first time, and it's the first for the reason. It's the most dynamic, the most exciting. It's almost like he hardly has actually even hit the ground yet, so it is very powerful, and it starts out the slow evolution of the falls here. Now this piece here, as you can see the form, there's so much dynamic action in it. I've captured in clay, hopefully in the future bronze, the actual figure as soon as he hits the ground. And so this is powerful, but wait till you see the piece when it's done in its bronze, because what we will have is a bronze cross worked within the piece here. But I just wanted to show you that, the actual form without anything on it at this point in time, so you can see the almost lyrical gesture that the Christ figure takes. But then the bronze cross will be welded onto the bronze figure in its casted completion, which will be positioned in a way to best show off not only the figure, but also the dynamic fall that Christ takes for the first time here. And you can see here it'll be worked in a specific way that will enhance the viewer's understanding of the fall as well as the cross. Something like this. The piece does not necessarily have a best advantage point to look at. I personally love it at several different angles, but primarily this would be a great angle to see. You can see here the motion is accentuated by the falling cross. A couple more minutes, the Christ figure will be flattened on the ground and the cross will be on top of them. And this sets the pace for the excitement of the whole sculptural process. For me, it was a challenge, an artistic challenge, to do such a dynamic figure in such motion. I can't wait to see it in its bronze form. I think it will look even more beautiful when it's shimmering in the metal. This piece here, unlike a lot of the other pieces, and like, for instance, Christ being laid in a tomb, is very, very abstract. And if you take off from your mind, if you take off the, if you can visualize the feet gone and just the general shape, it does have the appeal of an abstract sculpture. It has so much motion, it has so many beautiful forms within it. It almost reminds me of a seashell of some sort that you would find on the beach with the striations and the movement. It's very, very organic, and I think it's one of the most exciting and one of the most abstract of the whole set. But I want to, on this set, bring in so many different weapons, so many different materials, so this truly will be a set of Stations of the Cross that appeals to everyone. This Station of the Cross is basically the most complex piece in the whole set. It's Christ speaking to the women, and what I did not necessarily want to do on this piece is have Christ not at a state of struggling. I have him, if he's talking at all, it's a few muttered words under the strain of the heavy cross. I wanted to have the Christ really, really in a stressful, straining position. So many times I've seen depictions of Christ speaking to the women being very, very relaxed and calm and not under any stress whatsoever. I also wanted to have so many different women on this piece. What? Go. Okay, station number 8, I've always had a problem with. Simply because it's a lot of sculptures if you're going to talk about including a lot of women. And so this one, what I decided to do was not only do a front of the piece, but also a back. And it has equal amounts of women. And if you might notice on this piece here, the women are all young. And what I wanted to do here was get away from what I've seen in so many different Stations of the Cross, where all the women are motherly looking. Sure, granted, I have down below here several mothers with their newborn babes, but what I wanted to do primarily is create a Station of the Cross that truly would appeal to younger people. And because I think that they, in Christian imagery, very rarely have any sculptures that they can really identify with. There's 100 maternal looking saints. There's 100 depictions of Mother Mary, but very few times do you see teenagers and young girls represented. So on this piece I have a semicircle of all young women. So I think that the people will really identify with it. I mean, the younger people really identify with it. If you look at the Christ figure too, he looks like he's his whole gesture is hunched over and strained. Not only his expression, but his whole posture, especially his head and his foot. He's on a journey here. The general shape of the piece, which you can see, is a semicircle to accentuate the idea of that he is on a journey, that this procession that he's making is going on. The figures get smaller and more hazed off in a distance, which creates the idea of infinite amount of women here. I'm running out of time in this documentation, so I'm going to have to make these descriptions a little bit faster here. On this piece here, what I wanted to do was really depict the relationship between Mary and Christ, and the intimacy here is phenomenal. So many times he's aloof with one hand stretched out. This one they're embracing. You can see the one hand up to suggest that Christ is holding this huge cross as he's continuing on. But it's the intimacy on this one that really is powerful. Okay, on this piece here, again the same motif with Christ taking up his cross. You can see the striations. The whole piece becomes animated with the cross. The cross becomes symbolic. But this one is, I think, absolutely amazing because you have the relationship going on between Simon and Christ. Christ has his face inside the piece. He's so strenuous. Simon is looking over in bewilderment as well as strain and also awe. You can see this piece works on this side as predominantly Christ with the head of Simon peeping over. And on this side, you see Simon. So it's two sculptures in one. It's definitely a piece that is totally three-dimensional. I love it. I love it because of its swirls. I love it because of the action. You see the action of the Christ, the flowing garments. It's great. Christ being nailed to the cross here. This piece has gotten to its second stage. It's no longer in the clay, it's now in the resin. Now it's time to smooth out the whole piece. It'll be very much smoothed out, but this will give you a general idea of what the finished piece will look like. Now this one here, you have the action of them holding down the Christ figure. It's very, very realistic with the strain of the people holding Christ down. You have this dominant supervisor feature that's looking down at the whole scenario. This is very, very realistic. Look at the expressions on the face. They're very, very Kafkaesque, horrific. This is a nightmare sculpted. That's how I like to interpret this piece here. This is Christ being taken down from the cross. This is another horror of a sculpture in the sense that the emotions of grief are basically depicted realistically. Although the sculpture, the figures are more abstract in the sense, I think that the realism comes in with the emotions. The heavy weight of the Christ figure, the strain, the body being fallen down is very, very powerful. I like this piece. It reminds me of the Rembrandt etching, and I think it will invoke the same emotion when it's worked within the whole set. And that's basically all the pieces I have to show you here in my studio right now. It was an amazing process. It took me months and months to come into getting them to this stage. The project still isn't finished yet. They just now go on to the bronzing stage where some fine-tuning will be made before they're cast. It's wonderful, and I think that the problem with Stations of the Cross is artists do not take them seriously. I took each one of these pieces as an actual sculpture that my intention would be to have it as much dignity and nobility and care taken to this as if they're independent art pieces. And I'm proud about the piece. I'm proud about them all here, and it was a wonderful experience creating them.